On a freezing Christmas night in a quiet Vermont town, a retired police chief heard a sound beneath the snow. Not a bark, not a cry, but something knocking. Softly like life, asking for one last chance. What he found would change the rest of his winter and maybe his heart forever. A broken mother dog, 5 newborn lives, and a choice that no rulebook could prepare him for. This is not just a rescue story. This is a story about loss, hope, and the kind of love that refuses to give up even in the coldest night. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from today. Leave your city or country in the comments. I would love to read them. And if stories about kindness, animals, and second chances matter to you, please press subscribe and support this channel. Now let us step into the snow together and begin the story. Merrow Creek, Vermont wore December the way an old hymn wears silence. Patiently, faithfully, with a little ache tucked between the notes. The town was small enough that the diner's neon sign could feel like a lighthouse, and old enough that the brick storefronts seemed to remember every Christmas they'd ever seen. Snow had been falling since late afternoon, and by night it turned into a thick, determined blizzard that erased tire tracks almost as soon as they were made. Wind pressed against windows, shook the bare birches along Birchline Road, and swept through the streets like a restless spirit looking for somewhere to belong. On nights like this, even the river sounded hushed, as if the whole valley had agreed to hold its breath. Officer Silas Keene moved through it all in a marked patrol truck that looked slightly too big for the narrow roads and slightly too tired for another winter. Silas was 61, broad-shouldered in a weathered way rather than a proud one, with a jaw that seemed carved from stubborn granite and a gray mustache that made him look like a man who'd spent decades saying, "Slow down," and "think it through," to people who didn't want to hear either. His eyes were a pale, steady blue, kind eyes that had learned to stand behind a badge, and heavy eyes that had learned what grief can do when it sets up house and refuses to pay rent. He was the town's chief, though he didn't carry the title like a crown. He wore it like a coat he couldn't quite take off, even on nights he wanted to. Retirement was close enough to taste. 2, maybe 3 weeks. Yet he drove as if the road could still surprise him, because it often did. The radio murmured in the dash, dispatch's voice softened by static and snow. The young dispatcher, Mara Wicks, 26, quick-talking, coffee-fueled, and still bright enough to believe every problem had a neat solution, had asked him earlier if he really wanted to patrol on Christmas week. Silas had answered with a tired chuckle and the kind of humor that's half shield, half apology. If trouble wants to send a holiday card, it'll send it whether I'm home or not. He didn't tell Mara the other reason. His house felt too quiet, and silence could be louder than sirens when it knew your name. He drove Birchline Road slower than usual, windshield wipers struggling like old arms against the thickening snow. The storm blurred the world into a narrow tunnel of headlights, the rest swallowed by white. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the radio as if his fingers needed something to do besides remember. 7 years earlier, his wife, Eleanor Keene, had died in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and endings. Eleanor had been a warm woman with chestnut hair that always escaped its pins, a laugh that came easily, and a stubborn tenderness that made her both beloved and mildly terrifying to anyone who tried to mistreat a waitress or a stray animal. Her death had not made Silas bitter, exactly. It had made him careful. Careful with joy. Careful with hope. As if the heart were a glass ornament you only took out when you were certain the cat wouldn't knock it down. Snow hammered the hood. The truck's tires crunched through drifts. Then Silas heard it. Something that did not belong to wind or engine or radio. A faint metallic scrape, irregular, tired, like a spoon dragged across ice. It came from the right side of the road, near the shadowed edge of the birch forest. He eased off the gas, listening. Again. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Not an animal's cry, not a human shout. More like a pleading knock made by something too weak to raise its voice. Silas's shoulders tightened. 32 years in uniform had taught him that danger didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hid inside the quiet, waiting for someone to ignore it. He pulled over, angled the truck so the headlights aimed toward the tree line, and clicked on his hazard lights. Cold slapped him the moment he stepped out. The wind shoved snow into his face like a rude child. He pulled his collar up and walked toward the sound, boots sinking with each step. His flashlight carved a thin blade of light through the storm. The scrape came again, closer now. Then the beam landed on her. A German shepherd, female, full-grown, maybe 3 or 4 years old, stood half in the open, half in the shelter of a leaning fence post and a skeletal thicket. She was black and tan, but her coat had lost its shine, dulled by frost and neglect. Her body was lean to the point of sharpness. Ribs suggested themselves beneath fur, and her hips looked like they'd been whittled down by hunger. Around her neck, the hair was rubbed thin in a pale ring, the unmistakable mark of an old rope or collar that had bitten for a long time. Her front paws were cracked and raw, split by cold. She held one foot slightly off the ground as if it hurt to put weight on it. Yet her posture wasn't submissive. It was controlled. She didn't bark. She didn't run. She looked straight at Silas, ears forward, eyes dark and clear, eyes that carried neither panic nor aggression, only a fierce, exhausted purpose. In another life, she might have been a working dog, trained and proud, the kind that moved like a shadow beside an officer. In this life, she looked like she'd been betrayed by hands she once trusted, and had decided trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Except tonight, apparently, when survival required a bargain. Silas's voice came out softer than he intended. "Hey there," he said, as if speaking to a frightened neighbor rather than a dog on the edge of collapse. He crouched slowly, careful not to loom. "You're a long way from home." The dog blinked once, then turned her head toward the woods. She took a step, limped, steadied herself, and looked back at him again. The message was plain as a road sign: follow. Silas hesitated, a flash of procedure lighting up his mind like a warning beacon. Call for animal control, call a second unit, document, secure. But the storm was getting worse, and the dog's paws were telling a story that did not have time for paperwork. He stood and nodded once, as if she were a witness giving him directions. "All right," he said. "Show me." She moved into the birches, not fast. She couldn't, but determined, cutting a narrow path through snowdrifts. Silas followed, one hand on the flashlight, the other instinctively near his belt, though there was nothing here to draw a weapon for. The woods smelled of wet bark and cold earth trapped beneath ice. The wind turned the branches into rattling bones. The dog led him deeper until the headlights were a faint glow behind them, and then she stopped beside a low mound that looked like nothing at first. Just snow piled oddly, like the storm had stumbled there. She nosed the mound, pawed weakly, and the scrape returned, cardboard against ice. Silas knelt, brushing snow away with gloved hands. His fingertips found soggy paper, torn flaps, the collapsed corner of a box. As he pulled it open, warmth fled his chest and was replaced by a sharp, stunned anger. Inside were 4 newborn German shepherd puppies, tiny as loaves of bread, pressed together for survival. Their eyes were sealed shut, their ears still folded. They were the same black and tan promise as their mother, but damp. Shivering, and dangerously still. One of them twitched, a thread of life barely holding. Silas's breath caught. "Oh God," he whispered, not as a phrase, but as a prayer thrown into a blizzard. The mother dog hovered close, her nose touching each pup quickly, counting. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the strain of staying upright. Silas understood in an instant. She hadn't been wandering. She had been searching for help. She had spent whatever strength she had left on one last mission, dragging herself to the road, making noise she could barely make, and trusting a stranger in a storm to do what she could not. Silas shrugged off his heavy coat, ignoring the bite of cold, and wrapped the puppies carefully inside it. He tucked them against his chest like fragile secrets, trying to shield them from wind with his own body. The mother made a low sound, not a bark, not a growl, something softer, like a breath turned into meaning. Silas stood, snow already soaking into his shirt, and glanced toward the road. He could call dispatch. He could ask Mara to send backup. He could do everything right. But he imagined waiting here while the storm piled higher, the pup's tiny heat fading while he described coordinates into a radio. His decision landed in him like a gavel. "We're going now," he said, not to the dog, but to the universe. No delays. He trudged back through the birches with the puppies held tight, the mother limping behind, never more than a few steps away. When the patrol truck came into view, its headlights glowing through snow like a pair of watchful eyes, Silas felt a strange, reluctant relief, like reaching a shoreline after nearly forgetting what land looked like. He opened the passenger door and placed the bundled puppies on the seat, turning the heater to full blast. He layered his spare fleece blanket over them, then his knit cap, then anything within reach that could trap warmth. The mother hesitated only a heartbeat before climbing in, curling around the bundle with a protective stiffness that betrayed how much pain she was in. Her ears stayed angled toward the open world, guarding even as exhaustion dragged at her. Silas shut the door and stood a moment in the whipping snow, hand on the roof of the truck, chest rising hard. He looked at the dog's worn neck, her split paws, the fierce intelligence in her eyes. "You did good," he said quietly. "You did what you had to." He slid into the driver's seat, hands shaking, not from cold alone, and started the engine. As the truck turned toward home, the storm swallowed the tracks behind them, as if erasing the old story to make room for a new one. Silas didn't know it yet, but this night was not simply a rescue. It was a door opening inside him, creaking wide after years of rust. And the sound that had called him into the snow was not just scratching cardboard. It was fate, tapping its knuckles against his heart, insisting he answer. Marrow Creek slept uneasily as the storm tightened its grip, snow packing itself against doors and windows like an insistent guest that would not take a hint. By the time Officer Silas Keene turned into his own driveway, the night had grown heavy and deliberate, each gust of wind sounding like it carried intention. His house sat a little apart from the others on the street, a modest single-story structure with white siding and a porch light that cast a lonely yellow circle onto the snow. The place had not changed much in years, though Silas himself had. The porch steps still creaked in the same places, and the wind chime Eleanor once hung by the door, wooden, hand-carved, shaped like small birds, still knocked softly against itself when the wind was just right. Tonight, it sang in a broken, uneven rhythm, as if uncertain whether it was allowed to make noise again. Silas parked crookedly, something he usually corrected without thinking, but his attention was already on the passenger seat. The 4 newborn puppies lay bundled together, their bodies rising and falling so faintly it took focus to be sure they were breathing. Beside them, the German shepherd, now safely inside the cab, watched Silas with eyes that missed nothing. She was still trembling, though whether from cold, pain, or the slow release of adrenaline was impossible to tell. Her ears flicked toward the house, then back to the puppies, then to Silas, measuring. Silas opened his door and stepped into the storm, then hurried around to the other side. The wind bit at his face and snow slipped down the back of his collar, but he barely noticed. He gathered the puppies first, cradling them against his chest, feeling their small, desperate warmth like a fragile promise. "Easy now," he murmured, voice rough. "I've got you." The mother dog followed closely as he shouldered the door open with his hip. Warm air spilled out, carrying the faint scent of old wood, coffee grounds, and something else. Loneliness, maybe, or memory. The house seemed to hesitate, as if surprised to be entered with purpose again. Silas kicked the door shut behind him and stood there a moment, breathing. The living room lights were off, but the glow from the kitchen spilled across the floor, revealing a space that looked carefully maintained and carefully untouched. Furniture sat where it had always sat. Eleanor's favorite armchair still angled toward the window. A framed photograph of the two of them, taken on a summer hike years ago. Both squinting into the sun, rested on the mantel, its glass catching the light like a quiet witness. Silas moved quickly now. Boots tracked snow across the floor as he crossed into the kitchen. He set the puppies gently into a cardboard box he lined with towels and blankets, building a nest the way instinct guided more than experience. His hands were steady in the way they'd learned to be during emergencies, even as his heart pounded. The mother dog hovered close, lowering her head to sniff the puppies, counting again. then positioning herself between them and the room at large. She did not lie down fully. She stood guard, legs stiff, eyes following Silas's every movement. Silas straightened slowly, mindful of her space. "It's all right," he said. "No one's taking them." The words surprised him. He realized they weren't meant only for her. He filled a shallow bowl with lukewarm water and placed it a few feet away. The dog approached cautiously, sniffed, then drank greedily, water sloshing as her body betrayed how thirsty she'd been. Silas noticed then how old some of her injuries were, the faint scars along her flank, the way one ear bore a small notch as if from an old fight or careless hand. She was not young, but not old either. Life had simply taken more from her than it should have. Silas reached for the phone mounted on the kitchen wall. His fingers hesitated before dialing. The vet clinic. Emergency number. He glanced at the clock. 1:14 a.m. Christmas was close enough to taste, and this was the kind of call people apologized for before they made it. He did not apologize. When the line connected, a woman answered with a voice thick with sleep but sharpened by professionalism. Dr. Elaine Porter, late 40s, calm to the point of being almost unnerving, had been Merrow Creek's primary veterinarian for over a decade. She was a tall woman with iron gray hair, usually pulled into a no-nonsense bun, known for her blunt honesty and her unshakable devotion to animals everyone else had given up on. Silas had seen her work miracles with hands that never trembled. "Elaine," Silas said, "it's Silas Keene. I'm sorry to wake you." "If you're calling, it's because something's wrong," she replied. "Tell me." He did. The abandoned puppies, the storm, the mother dog's condition. Elaine listened without interruption, asking only for specifics. Age estimate, breathing rate, temperature if he could manage it. When he finished, there was a brief silence. "You did the right thing bringing them in," she said finally. "Hypothermia in neonates is a death sentence if they're left out." "The mother?" "Bad shape," Silas admitted. "She's standing, but barely. Paw injuries. Old collar mark. Looks like she's been on her own a while. Keep her warm. Don't force her to lie down if she won't. I'll be there as soon as I can dig my car out." Silas exhaled, tension loosening just a fraction. He hung up and turned back to the kitchen. The dog had shifted position, now lying half-curled around the puppies, her body forming a living wall. She trembled, muscles tight, refusing full rest. Silas knelt a few feet away, lowering himself slowly so he was less imposing. "You're safe here," he said. "I promise." She watched him, eyes dark and searching. If she trusted him, it was not because of words. It was because she had nothing left but hope, and hope is a reckless thing. Silas fetched more blankets, draping them over the box, careful not to smother the puppies. He turned the thermostat higher than he usually would, ignoring the faint echo of Eleanor's voice teasing him about heating bills. For once, the house felt like it needed to be warm, not just comfortable. Minutes passed, then more. Outside, the storm showed no signs of mercy. Silas brewed coffee he would barely touch, the smell filling the kitchen with something almost like normalcy. He checked the puppies again and again, counting breaths, watching for movement. One of them stirred, releasing a tiny sound that barely qualified as a squeak. Silas felt his chest tighten. The mother lifted her head instantly, nose touching the pup, reassurance flowing from her in silent waves. Silas noticed then how she positioned herself, always between the puppies and any open space, always alert. Even exhaustion had not stripped her of that instinct. "You're something else," he murmured. He needed a name for her, something to make her real beyond circumstance. His gaze drifted to the wind chime outside the window, birds knocking softly in the storm. A small, resilient creature that sings even in cold. "Wren," he said aloud, testing it. The dog's ears flicked. She looked at him just briefly, then back to the puppies. He took that as permission. "All right, Wren," Silas said. "Let's get through the night." Hours slipped by in fragments. Silas dozed in a kitchen chair, waking at every shift of sound. Each time he checked the box, checked Wren's breathing, checked the door as if expecting trouble to knock. The house no longer felt empty. It felt crowded with fragile lives and unspoken bargains. Near dawn, headlights cut through the snow outside. Dr. Elaine Porter arrived, coat dusted white, boots heavy with ice. She took in the scene with a single glance, her expression softening despite herself. "You've been busy," she said quietly. She examined the puppies first, then Wren, her hands gentle but thorough. "Severe hypothermia," she confirmed. "Old paw injuries, some lung involvement from prolonged cold exposure." She looked at Silas. "She's a fighter, but this won't be quick. She'll need time, care, patience." Silas nodded, a strange resolve settling into him. "She's got it," he said. "So do they." Elaine gave a small, tired smile. "Then let's do what we can." As the first pale light of morning crept through the windows, the storm finally began to loosen its grip. Snow still fell, but softer now, less angry. In the quiet kitchen, surrounded by blankets, breath, and the steady presence of life, Silas Keene realized something fundamental had shifted. His house, long resigned to silence, was learning how to breathe again. Marrow Creek woke beneath a sky the color of old steel, the storm finally loosening its grip but leaving behind a world stunned into silence. Snowbanks leaned against houses like exhausted shoulders, and the road outside Silas Keene's home looked less like a street and more like a long, pale scar cutting through the town. It was the third day after the blizzard, and the air carried that brittle cold that follows great storms. Sharp, clean, and unforgiving. Winter had not retreated. It had merely paused to watch what the survivors would do next. Silas stood in his kitchen pulling on his uniform jacket, the familiar weight of the fabric settling over his shoulders with practiced ease. At 61, he moved more slowly than he once had, but there was still a steadiness to him, a quiet authority shaped by decades of service. His face, lined by wind and years of restraint, looked especially drawn this morning. Sleep had come in fragments, broken by the smallest sounds, tiny squeaks from the puppies, the uneven rhythm of Wren's breathing, the low hum of the heater working overtime. Still, he felt something he had not felt in years, purpose that did not come from duty alone. Behind him, the house stirred softly. The puppies slept in their makeshift nest near the kitchen radiator, their bodies pressed together, breaths warmer and more confident than they had been the first night. Wren lay nearby on a thick pad of blankets, her long body stretched out but her head lifted, eyes tracking Silas as he moved. She was weaker today. That much was obvious. Her movements were slower, her breaths heavier, and when she shifted, pain rippled visibly through her frame. Yet her gaze remained sharp, vigilant. Motherhood, Silas was learning, could keep a body standing long after it should have folded. Dr. Elaine Porter had come twice since the storm, administering fluids, cleaning Wren's paws, wrapping them carefully, and checking the puppy's progress with meticulous attention. Elaine, with her iron-gray hair and unyielding honesty, had not sugarcoated anything. "She's alive because she refuses not to be," she'd said the night before. "But she's running on something deeper than strength. Don't mistake that for recovery." Silas understood. He had seen the same thing in people, men and women who held on not because the body could, but because the heart would not let go yet. He crouched beside Wren now, lowering himself carefully. "I'll be back," he told her, voice calm and low. "Just for a little while." Wren's ears flicked, and she nudged one paw slightly closer to the puppy's, her way of anchoring herself. Trust, for her, came in inches, not leaps. Silas stepped out into the cold, locking the door behind him. His patrol truck waited, dusted with snow, looking much as it always had, reliable, scarred, uncomplaining. As he drove toward Birchline Road, the town passed quietly around him. A man shoveled his driveway with stiff movements. A woman stood at her window holding a mug, watching the world thaw by degrees. Christmas lights blinked faintly beneath layers of frost, stubborn as hope. Birchline Road looked different in daylight. What had been a tunnel of darkness and snow the night of the rescue was now a stark, almost brutal landscape. Fallen branches lay half-buried, tire tracks had frozen into ridges. Silas parked near the tree line and stepped out, pulling his hat low against the cold. This time, he carried a notepad, a camera, and the weight of responsibility that came with daylight and law. He did not expect to find anyone. People who abandoned animals in storms did not leave calling cards. Still, he followed the path Wren had taken, his boots sinking into crusted snow. The forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels watchful. As he walked, Silas studied the ground carefully, reading the story written there. He saw Wren's tracks, unmistakable now, deep, uneven impressions that spoke of exhaustion and injury. He saw where she had stopped, turned, circled. And then, something else. A smaller set of tracks. Silas stopped. He knelt, brushing snow aside with gloved hands, his heart tightening. These prints were faint, irregular, trailing away from the original box site toward a cluster of rocks half buried by snow. His breath clouded as he followed them, a dread settling in his chest that felt uncomfortably familiar. The rocks formed a narrow crevice, the kind a child might hide in during summer games, now transformed into a deadly trap. Snow had drifted over the opening, leaving only a shallow depression to mark it. Silas dropped to his knees, ignoring the bite of cold through his pants, and swept the snow away with urgent hands. Inside, pressed against stone and shadow, was a fifth puppy, smaller than the others, lighter. His fur was stiff with frost, his body frighteningly still. For a long moment, Silas could not tell if he was breathing at all. "No," Silas whispered, the word tearing free before he could stop it. He scooped the puppy up, cradling the tiny body against his chest. The cold was shocking, even through layers of clothing. Silas slipped his uniform jacket open, pressing the puppy directly against his skin, wrapping both arms around him like a shield. It was not a calculated act. It was instinct, raw and immediate. The same instinct that had driven him to hold Eleanor's hand during her last nights in the hospital, willing warmth and presence to stand in for miracles. "Stay," he murmured, over and over, breath puffing white into the air. "Just stay." The puppy's body was frighteningly limp. Silas staggered to his feet, turning back toward the road with careful steps, every movement deliberate. He did not run. He knew better. Panic wasted heat. Instead, he moved steadily, whispering constantly, his voice low and relentless, as if words alone could tether a soul to the world. When he reached the truck, his hands shook as he opened the door. He sat inside, engine running, heater blasting, the puppy still pressed to his chest. Minutes stretched thin. Silas counted breaths that barely existed, rubbed warmth into tiny limbs, and fought the creeping certainty that he was too late. And then, barely more than a tremor, the puppy moved. It was so slight Silas almost missed it. A twitch. A shallow, gasping breath. A whisper of sound that might have been imagined if Silas's heart had not been so fiercely alert. "Oh," he breathed, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "There you are." He stayed like that for a long time, waiting until the puppy's breathing, though still fragile, found a rhythm. Only then did he drive home, his focus absolute. His mind already leaping ahead to Elaine, to warming protocols, to the fragile line between survival and loss. Back in the kitchen, Wren sensed him before he spoke. She struggled to lift herself, pain flaring, eyes fixed on Silas's arms. When she saw the puppy, her breath hitched, and she released a low, broken sound. Grief and relief tangled together. Silas knelt, placing the puppy gently with the others. Wren moved closer despite herself, nose touching the tiny body, counting again. Once, twice, thrice, 4 times. 5. She closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion finally cracking through her vigilance. Silas watched her, understanding settling into him with quiet force. She had tried to save them all. In the storm, in the dark, with a body already failing her, Wren had gone back. She had chosen to risk what little life she had left for one more chance. She had not failed. Time had. Silas rested a hand lightly against her shoulder, feeling the tremor beneath her fur. "You didn't leave him," he said softly. "You came back." Wren did not look at him. She did not need to. Her answer lay in the fragile cluster of lives breathing between them, and in the truth Silas now carried with him. Some beings endure, not because the world is kind, but because love refuses to let go, even when the cost is everything. Outside, the wind stirred the birches again, gentler this time, as if the forest itself were listening. The night settled over Marrow Creek with a quieter confidence than the storm had shown, as if winter itself had drawn back to watch rather than interfere. Snow still clung to rooftops and fences, but the wind had gentled, and the cold now moved with a deliberate patience instead of rage. Inside Silas Keene's house, the air was warm and close, thick with the mingled scents of clean blankets, antiseptic, and the faint metallic note of fear that comes when life hangs by a thread. Silas sat on the kitchen floor, his back against the cabinet, jacket folded beneath his spine like a concession to age. He had not bothered turning on the living room lights. The softer glow from the kitchen was enough, and anything brighter felt intrusive. In front of him, arranged with the care of a man who had learned reverence the hard way, was the small nest he had built again. Layers of towels and fleece forming a shallow cradle. 4 puppies slept in a tight, warm knot, their bodies rising and falling with the confidence of creatures who had decided, together, to stay. The 5th lay slightly apart, smaller, quieter, wrapped in a towel Silas had warmed against his chest before setting it down. That puppy, later Silas would call him Hearth, though the name had not yet arrived, was balanced on the edge of the world. His fur was still damp, his limbs fragile as twigs, his breath thin enough to be mistaken for imagination. Every few seconds, Silas leaned forward, counting, willing each rise of the tiny chest to become a habit instead of a plea. Wren lay nearby on her blankets, stretched out on her side at last, though rest did not come easily. She was a large German shepherd, her body once built for endurance and purpose, now marked by hardship. Her muzzle showed the faint silvering of age accelerated by suffering, and her eyes, dark, intelligent, endlessly alert, tracked the puppies even when exhaustion tugged her eyelids closed. She was breathing heavily, each breath sounding like it had to travel a long way to be useful. Her paws were wrapped, bandages neat but already damp where melted snow and antiseptic had soaked through earlier. She had not eaten much. She had not slept deeply. She had given everything she had, and her body was now asking difficult questions in return. Silas shifted, easing himself closer to the nest. He reached out and dipped his finger into the small bowl of warmed milk replacement Dr. Elaine Porter had left behind. Elaine had shown him how, slowly, carefully, no rushing, no forcing. "Think of it as persuasion, not feeding," she had said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You're inviting life to stay." Silas lifted Hearth gently, cradling the tiny body against his palm. He brought the drop of milk to the puppy's mouth, barely touching the lips. At first, nothing happened. Silas held still, his breath shallow, heart pounding with the quiet urgency of a man bargaining with fate. Then, the smallest thing, a reflex maybe, or a memory of instinct, flickered. Hearth's mouth opened. A tongue moved. The drop vanished. Silas swallowed hard, emotion pressing suddenly against his throat. "That's it," he murmured, voice rough but steady. "Just like that." He repeated the process, drop by drop, minute after minute, until Hearth's breathing grew marginally stronger, his tiny body warming under Silas's hands. Time slowed, stretching into something fragile and sacred. The clock on the wall ticked, loud in the quiet, marking seconds that felt unearned. Wren lifted her head, dragging it from the blankets with visible effort. She watched Silas feed the puppy, her gaze intent, measuring, protective. When Hearth shifted weakly, Wren released a low sound. Not quite a whine, not quite a sigh, that carried more meaning than words. Silas glanced at her, meeting her eyes. "I know," he said softly. "I'm trying." He leaned back, bringing Hearth against his chest again, sharing warmth the way he had in the truck, the way he had learned to do years ago when warmth was all he had left to offer Eleanor in her final days. Back then, he had whispered to her too. Nonsense, memories, promises he knew he could not keep, because the act of speaking had felt like a form of resistance. Now the words came again, unbidden. "Stay," he whispered. "Just stay." The house seemed to listen. Hours passed in fragments. Elaine returned briefly, her movements quiet and efficient, checking vitals, adjusting blankets, administering fluids to Wren with practiced care. She watched Silas work without comment, her eyes assessing not just the puppies, but the man kneeling on his kitchen floor like a penitent. "She's fading," Elaine said finally, nodding toward Wren. There was no cruelty in her tone, only honesty. "Not fast, but she's spending what little reserve she has left." Silas looked at Wren, at the way her body curved instinctively toward the puppies, even in rest, at the tension that never fully left her muscles. "She won't stop," he said quietly. "Not while they need her." Elaine's mouth tightened, something like respect flickering across her face. "No," she agreed. "She won't." When Elaine left again, promising to return at dawn, the night closed in around the small circle of life in the kitchen. Silas sat with his back against the cabinet once more, hearth tucked against his chest beneath his sweater, sharing warmth the only way he knew how. His limbs ached, his eyes burned, yet he felt more awake than he had in years. At some point, Hearth made a sound. Not a cry, not quite, but a thin, reedy squeak that sliced through the quiet like a spark. Silas froze, scarcely daring to breathe. Wren's head snapped up instantly, her ears straining forward, her eyes locking onto the sound with fierce clarity. "There," Silas breathed, a smile breaking through exhaustion. "You hear that?" "He's here." Hearth shifted again, the squeak repeating, a little stronger this time. The sound was small, but it carried weight. The unmistakable declaration of a life insisting on itself. Silas laughed then, a short, incredulous sound that startled him with its own existence. He pressed his forehead briefly against the warm curve of the puppy's body, gratitude flooding him in a way that felt almost painful. Wren struggled to move closer, her body protesting. Silas was there immediately, guiding her gently, helping her settle so she could press her nose to Hearth, count him, reassure herself. She did not lick him. She did not fuss. She simply breathed him in, memorizing the fact of his survival. As the night wore on, something else became clear to Silas, settling into him with quiet certainty. He watched Wren watch the puppies, how her eyes followed each breath, how her body shifted minutely to shield them from drafts, how she conserved what little strength she had, not for herself, but for them. It struck him then with sudden force that the puppies were not a burden to her. They were not a responsibility she endured. They were her reason. Wren had not held on through the storm because she was strong. She had held on because she had something to hold on for. The puppies were the thread that tied her to the world, the promise that made pain negotiable and exhaustion secondary. Without them, Silas suspected, she might have let go already, quietly, somewhere beneath the birches. Silas looked down at Hearth, now breathing steadily, his tiny body warm and stubborn against Silas's chest. He thought of Eleanor, of the way love had once tethered her to life longer than doctors expected, longer than logic allowed. He thought of the promises people make to themselves in the dark, the bargains struck without witnesses. Near dawn, the house grew still in a new way. The puppies slept deeply, their small bodies loose and trusting. Hearth lay among them now, no longer separate, his presence accepted as if he had never been gone. Wren rested with her head on her paws, eyes half closed, her breathing still labored but even. Silas remained where he was, watching, guarding, unwilling to move lest the fragile balance be disturbed. Outside, snow began to fall again. Light this time, almost gentle. Not a storm. Just winter reminding the world that it was still there. Inside, a single small life had chosen to stay. And in that choice, Silas understood something that would shape every decision to come. Sometimes survival is not about strength or luck or even timing. Sometimes it is about being seen, being held, and being given one more reason not to let go. Christmas Eve arrived in Marrow Creek without ceremony, slipping into town on soft steps, as if mindful of the fragile lives it found there. The storm had retreated to the hills, leaving behind a quilt of snow that gleamed faintly under the gray-blue sky. Icicles hung from eaves like glass prayers, and the river moved slow and dark beneath its frozen skin. Bells from the small white church downtown rang once in the afternoon. Practice, not proclamation. And then fell quiet again, saving their voices for later. Inside Silas Keene's house, warmth had become an ongoing negotiation. The heater hummed steadily. The thermostat turned higher than Silas would ever have allowed in previous winters, and blankets lay everywhere, on chairs, across the floor, folded and refolded into purpose. The kitchen, once a place of solitary meals and careful routines, now felt like the heart of something living. It smelled faintly of soup simmering on the stove, of clean cotton, of antiseptic, and hope. Silas moved through the house with the careful energy of a man who had learned that every action mattered. He was freshly shaved, though the lines on his face remained, deepened by sleeplessness and softened by something like resolve. His uniform hung untouched on the back of a chair. Tonight, duty wore a different shape. He ladled soup into a pot to keep warm, then checked the puppies again, counting breaths as if numbers could anchor the world. The puppies were stronger today. Their bodies pressed together in easy familiarity, tiny paws twitching in dreams that Silas hoped were warm ones. Hearth lay among them, no longer set apart. His breathing steadier, his small chest rising with the confidence of a creature that had chosen life and found it agreeable enough to stay. Watching them, Silas felt a cautious joy stir. Cautious because joy, like ice, could crack when trusted too quickly. Wren lay nearby on her blankets, thinner now in a way that spoke of reserves spent. Her eyes followed Silas whenever he crossed the room, but the fierce edge had softened, replaced by a weary acceptance that felt like trust earned the hard way. She did not rise when he approached. Instead, she lifted her head slightly, ears tilting, acknowledging him. Her breathing was still labored, but even. Elaine's words echoed in Silas's mind. Not quick, not easy, and he carried them like a compass, pointing him toward patience. As dusk fell, the house brightened. Silas plugged in the old box of Christmas lights he had not used since Eleanor's last winter. The bulbs flickered uncertainly at first, then settled into a warm, steady glow. He draped them along the window and across the mantel, careful not to crowd the puppies with light or heat. The effect was subtle, not festive in a loud way, but gentle, like a promise whispered rather than announced. There was a knock at the door. Silas paused, heart jumping in a way that surprised him. Visitors had been rare since Eleanor's death. He crossed the room and opened the door to find Reverend Thomas Hale standing on the porch, snow dusting the shoulders of his long coat. Thomas was in his late 60s, tall and stooped, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hands that bore the quiet strength of a man who had buried more people than he cared to count. He had baptized children, married couples, and stood beside hospital beds offering words when words felt small. "I heard you had guests," Thomas said gently, nodding toward the warm light spilling from inside. Silas stepped aside. "Come in." Thomas entered, removing his hat, his gaze immediately drawn to the nest on the floor. His expression shifted, softening, deepening, something like reverence crossing his face. "Well," he murmured, "that's quite a sermon without words." Silas almost smiled. Thomas set a paper bag on the counter. "Soup and bread," he said. "Figured you might forget to eat." Silas nodded, grateful. They stood together for a moment, watching the puppies breathe. Watching Wren watch them. Thomas spoke quietly, offering a prayer that did not ask for miracles so much as endurance. When he finished, he squeezed Silas's shoulder once, firmly, and let himself out, leaving warmth behind him like an afterimage. Later, Silas sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, the glow reflecting off the lights. He hesitated before typing, fingers hovering over the keys. Posting anything, asking for help, inviting attention, felt like opening a door he had kept closed for years. But he thought of Wren's scars, of the box in the snow, of the trust that had been placed in him without negotiation. He wrote carefully. Not a plea, not a spectacle, just the truth. 5 German Shepherd puppies rescued from abandonment during the storm. Mother recovering. Future adoption considered only with strict conditions. Lifetime commitment, no chains, no neglect. Home checks required. This is not a holiday gift. This is a promise. He posted it to the town board and a small regional rescue group Elaine had recommended. Responses came quickly, too quickly. Messages offering cash, requests for just one, stories that sounded practiced. Silas read each one, his jaw tightening. He replied politely but firmly, declining most without negotiation. The conditions were not flexible. They were the point. When he finished, he closed the laptop and leaned back, exhaustion settling into his bones. He looked at Wren, who had shifted slightly closer to the puppies, her body forming a gentle arc around them. Silas moved to sit beside her on the floor, careful not to crowd. After a moment, Wren did something small and extraordinary. She rested her head on his leg. The weight was slight, tentative, but it carried meaning. Silas froze, scarcely daring to breathe. He rested his hand on her shoulder, letting it be there without asking for more. The trust was fragile. He honored it by not rushing. Outside, snow began to fall again, fine and slow, catching the glow of the Christmas lights like drifting embers. The clock chimed the hour softly. Somewhere in town, carols started. Voices raised in imperfect harmony, drifting through the cold. Silas looked down at Wren, at the puppies, at the quiet, breathing room he had not planned to fill. He thought of Eleanor, of promises left unspoken, of the way grief had taught him to close doors gently and keep them shut. Tonight, on Christmas Eve, he made a different choice. "I won't," he said quietly, to the room, to the memory, to the living beings who had trusted him. "I won't close it again." Wren's eyes closed for a moment, her breathing easing, as if she had heard and accepted the vow. The puppies slept on, unaware of contracts and conditions, knowing only warmth and the steady presence of those who would not leave. It was not the Christmas Silas had imagined in younger years. There were no wrapped gifts, no laughter spilling from every corner. But there was something else, something harder won, more durable. A house that had learned to stay open. A heart that had remembered how. And as the snow fell gently, no longer a threat but a companion, Marrow Creek held its breath, not in fear this time, but in quiet gratitude for a night that chose mercy over silence. Winter loosened its grip on Marrow Creek, the way an old guardian loosens a hand. Not all at once, not without suspicion, but enough to allow movement again. By the time March arrived, snow still lingered in the shadows of fences and beneath the birches, but the roads had softened, and the river spoke louder beneath its thinning skin. The town exhaled. So did Silas Keene. Months had passed since the blizzard, measured not by calendar pages but by milestones that mattered more. Eyes opening, paws steadying, breaths deepening. The puppies were no longer the trembling bundle of life he had carried from the forest. They were adolescents now, all legs and curiosity, black and tan coats gleaming as if polished by survival itself. They had learned the house, the creak of the hallway floorboard, the warm rectangle of sunlight that slid across the kitchen each afternoon, the rules that Silas enforced gently but firmly. No jumping on counters. Sit before doors. Kindness was not optional. Silas himself had changed in quieter ways. He still rose early, still made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, still kept his boots lined neatly by the door. But the house answered him now. It answered with the thump of tails, the soft scuff of paws, the sound of breathing that filled rooms once emptied by grief. He found himself humming sometimes, tuneless, absent-minded, an old habit returning without permission. Eleanor's photograph remained on the mantel, but it no longer felt like an accusation. It felt like company. Wren had grown older before his eyes. The months took their toll gently but unmistakably. Her gait slowed. Her muzzle silvered further, and there were days when she slept more than she woke. Yet peace had settled into her bones. She no longer startled at sudden sounds. She no longer positioned herself between danger and the door. She trusted the house to hold. She trusted Silas. When the puppies tumbled too close, she corrected them with a look rather than a growl, dignity intact. She was thinner now, but she carried herself with the quiet authority of one who had done her work and done it well. Hearth, named finally and officially on a morning when Silas realized he could not imagine the house without him, had grown into his name. He was sturdy, broad-chested, with a calm intelligence that felt earned rather than taught. He followed Silas everywhere, not out of need, but out of choice, as if learning the rhythms of a life he intended to keep. When Silas sat at the kitchen table, Hearth lay at his feet. When Silas walked the property line, Hearth walked beside him, ears forward, attentive, but relaxed. He wore a red collar now, plain and well-made, and he treated it like a badge. The adoption process began slowly, deliberately. Silas interviewed families the way he had once interviewed deputies, listening not just to answers but to what lived beneath them. He chose 3 households, each marked by loss in a way that did not harden them but made space. A widow in her early 70s who had lost her husband and needed a reason to speak aloud again. A middle-aged couple whose grown children had moved away, leaving silence where laughter once lived. A retired schoolteacher who walked with a cane and smiled with her whole face. Each meeting was careful, each goodbye hurt. Silas held each puppy, feeling the strength in their bodies, the promise in their weight. He explained routines. He explained needs. He explained that love was not a season. When he handed them over, he did so without ceremony, trusting the choice he had made. He cried after each one left, not openly, not dramatically, but with the quiet honesty of a man who understood that loving meant letting go with intention. Wren watched each departure from her place by the window. She did not whine. She did not follow. She lifted her head, counted the remaining bodies, and rested again. She understood in a way that surprised Silas. Her work had never been about keeping them forever. It had been about getting them far enough to choose their own paths. By late April, only 2 remained, Hearth and Wren. Silas's retirement came on a bright morning with a sky so blue it felt like a benediction. The town gathered briefly outside the station. Handshakes, a plaque, words spoken with affection and a touch of disbelief. Silas accepted it all with his usual humility, thanking people by name, deflecting praise with humor. When it was done, he returned home not as Chief Keen, but as Silas, a man with time and a door that stayed open. That afternoon, he sat on the porch steps, polishing his old badge with a cloth worn soft by years of use. Hearth lay beside him, head on his paws, watching with solemn interest. Wren rested nearby in the sun, eyes half closed, breathing slow and even. Silas turned the badge over in his hands, feeling the grooves, the weight. He had carried it through decades of storms and silences, through choices that had shaped him and losses that had nearly hollowed him out. He set it down for a moment, then reached for Hearth's collar. Carefully, reverently, he attached the badge to the ring. Not as an order, not as a burden, but as a symbol. "I'm done," Silas said softly, smiling. "You're on." Hearth lifted his head, ears tilting, as if considering the appointment. His tail thumped once, measured and sincere. Wren opened her eyes and watched them, the faintest flicker of approval passing through her gaze. She shifted slightly, settling more comfortably against the porch rail. Snow fell that evening, just a whisper of it, the last of the season. Not a storm, just winter saying goodbye. As dusk settled, Silas sat between them, one hand resting on Hearth's broad back, the other near Wren's shoulder. He did not think about what came next. He did not try to preserve the moment. He simply lived inside it. Not everything had returned to how it once was. Eleanor was still gone. Years still pressed their weight upon him. But something essential had been restored. Not the past, but the ability to step forward without closing his heart. In Marrow Creek, as spring crept closer and the world prepared itself for green again, a retired officer, a steadfast dog, and an aging mother who had given everything rested together in the quiet certainty that love, once chosen, does not diminish. It multiplies. And that, Silas knew, was enough. The lesson of this story is simple and eternal. Miracles do not always arrive as thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of a weak heartbeat, a trembling life, or a choice to care when it would be easier to turn away. God's miracles often move through ordinary hands, through people who choose compassion, through those who open their doors, their homes, and their hearts, even when they are tired, even when they are hurting. In our daily lives, we may not face a blizzard or a life on the edge, but every day we are given moments where love is a choice. To forgive, to help, to stay when walking away would hurt less. When we choose love, we become part of the miracle, and God does the rest. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. And if you believe in kindness and second chances and in God's quiet miracles, please type Amen in the comments. May God bless you and protect you wherever you are watching from. May He give you strength, warmth, and peace in your own winter seasons. Please remember to subscribe and support this YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of hope, love, and faith. Thank you for being here, and may God bless you always.